Greetings and welcome to Daniel chapter 3, lesson 4, Faith in the Fire. So last week we completed the review of the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, as well as Daniel's interpretation of that dream. We saw these four powerful world kingdoms all brought to nothing by the stone that was cut out without hands. That stone, after destroying the statue, and we'll look more at that in just a second, then turned into a mountain that covered the earth, one that can never be destroyed, the kingdom of Christ. So today, though, faith in the fire. Just by way of reminder, if you're catching up as part of my Sunday school class with this lesson, we do have a get-together March the 4th. I'll be smoking a brisket. Tim will be smoking some salmon. The rest of the class will be bringing other sides. We'll also have, I've got a couple of Christian video options for us as well. So mark your calendars, March the 4th, a get-together of the Truth Seekers. Just by way of reminder on where we are, we in the book of Daniel, again, Daniel went into captivity in the first deportation to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Babylon in 605 BC. Again, there were two more deportations, 597 BC. That's when Ezekiel went into captivity. Again, he was a contemporary with Daniel. And then the final one, 586 BC, that's when the temple was destroyed. But then equally, just remember Jeremiah is also a contemporary with Ezekiel and Daniel. Again, we are in Babylon now with Daniel, Shadrach, and Meshach, and Abednego, his three friends, these young men who are growing up and really walking with God in difficult situations and circumstances, but being obedient to God. Here we see an artist's rendition of the city. This is the Edamananke, the platform between heaven and earth. That would have been a temple built to the false god Marduk, the god of the city. But again, what should capture your attention is blue, gold, beautiful, powerful, triple walls, an amazing, powerful city. This is an artist's rendition. You have the northern palace, the southern palace, the processional way. There's the Edamananke. Again, triple-walled city. They've siphoned off or channeled off the Euphrates to make a moat that goes around the city, seemingly unpenetrable. Last week we saw Nebuchadnezzar's dream, that statue, that four-tiered statue. Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold, but if you remember, the whole thing was ultimately that stone cut out without hands, hit the feet, destroyed the entire statue. And everything was converted to shads, to dust, and the wind just carried it away. And there's what we're left with. All of that destroyed. Then the stone becomes a mountain. The mountain covers the earth. And ultimately, here is what Nebuchadnezzar said. Here is the great declaration that Nebuchadnezzar made. This is where we ended our lesson. The king answered Daniel and said, "Truly, your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." Now, as we read this, we might guess, if we didn't know the rest of the story, that Nebuchadnezzar has placed faith in Yahweh God. He has made a commitment to follow God. He has recognized that Yahweh is the true and living God. He's the God of gods. He is the Lord of kings, and he will follow him. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, as we will see this morning as we move into a new problem. Now, how much time has passed, we cannot be sure. I listened to a sermon by Alistair Begg. He said 9 years had passed. I'm not sure that's right. The Septuagint implies that this happened the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. If that's so, then we're talking around 15 years or so have elapsed, give or take a little bit. Now, is that right? I'm not sure. It does have the idea, though, that there has been some time passage. How much we cannot be sure. But what we can be sure of is that little has changed with Nebuchadnezzar. As we hit our story today, he appears to be as pagan as ever, in spite of the amazing event that ended in chapter 2 and his great declaration about Yahweh. So today we come to a story that's familiar to even people who are not Christians, the fiery furnace. Now, we've heard it said that the world is looking for men to demonstrate courage under fire. This morning, we will meet three men who demonstrate courage in the fire. Indeed, we will meet men who demonstrated courage when they knew it would lead them into the fire. I listened to Pastor Zach's sermon on Daniel chapter 3 just to catch up with what he had to say there. And he said this, and I'm going to quote him honestly. Quote, "Honestly, today's sermon, the chapter, it is one of the most important you will ever hear from my lips. The sermon I give you today, second only to just explaining the gospel, the truth of the gospel. As a believer in our culture, this is an incredibly, vitally important word that we will be looking at today," close quote. I could not agree with Pastor Zach more. Today, in this Sunday school lesson, we're going to see something that's extremely overt, but yet it happens all the time in our lives in a much more covert fashion. This is an experience, although a much grander, larger, much more overt experience, but it is an experience in a more subdued fashion we have dealt to us many days of the week. This is an experience we receive on a regular basis. And I agree with Pastor Zach. This is an incredible sermon, and the application of this sermon to our lives as New Testament believers. Okay, so let's get into it. Chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. Now that seems like it's almost shocking after how we ended chapter 2. But King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent together the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, quote, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace," close quotes, my, what a herald when you showed up here on the plain of Dura. Verse 7, "Therefore, as soon as the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up." So much to our amazement here in verse 1, we see that Nebuchadnezzar builds this massive image. Now it's probably an image of himself. He was only the golden head in the last image. Now it's the whole thing is gold, and it's all him. We see that it was 60 cubits tall, 6 cubits wide. That is very interesting. We'll come back and just make a passing comment. But if we use the cubit, 18 inches to a foot, this thing was 90 foot tall. If we use the royal Egyptian cubit, 20.6 inches, then it would be 103 feet tall and 10 feet wide. Now, I love to get these things into a place where I can understand them, where I can visualize them. So this is the Lincoln Memorial. The chair, from the bottom of the chair, Lincoln's feet to the top, 19 feet. So we're not even close to roughly 90 to 103 feet. This is the Sphinx of Giza. From the bottom to the top of the head, 66 feet tall. This is the Statue of Liberty. From the top of the torch to the feet, 151 feet, but from the top of the crown to the feet, 111 feet. Now, this is on scale with what Nebuchadnezzar built, around 90 to 103 feet tall. So if we're trying to get in our mind, what did he build there on the plain of Dura, covered in gold? It was essentially a little bit smaller than the Statue of Liberty. Now, we are not sure where the plain of Dura is located, but it's clearly within the district of Babylon. Equally, the word Dura literally means dwelling, so it may have been very close, even very near the city walls. Now, you can imagine the expense that it took to make this statue. Again, and how stunningly beautiful it would have been there on the plain of Dura, this flat area where it was highly visible, made of gold. Can you imagine what it looked like when the sun reflected off an image that was roughly 90 to 103 feet tall? And then just in passing, we can't help but notice its height is 60 cubits, its width is 6 cubits. 6 is the number of a man. This is not 666, but indeed this is 60 and 6. You can see in verses 2 and 3 that he gathers together the satraps, that would be the princes, the prefects or the administrators, the governors or the captains, the counselors, that could be judges, the treasurers, the justices or lawyers, the magistrates, and the officials or other rulers. Everyone who is a ruler or something to do with law in all of the provinces of Babylon is gathered together here on the plain of Dura. So Nebuchadnezzar has gathered together anybody and everybody who is anybody as it relates to laws and leadership for the dedication of his image. Now you should picture men who show up dressed up, wearing their Sunday best, if you will. Hundreds, probably thousands of people. They're brought before this image and they hear the herald proclaim that they are to fall down and worship this image. Now this is the real deal. This is worshiping the image that the king has built, and if you do not, there's a penalty. And by the way, the penalty is the king's going to kill you. The king's going to cast you in a fiery furnace, according to verse 6. So there is indeed a penalty to this if you don't fall down and worship him. This is indeed the kingdom of Satan against the kingdom of God. Not that the kingdom of Satan has any chance against the kingdom of God, but this is the world against God's men. This is what Satan wanted from Christ. It seems this is what Satan always wants. This is a false God with a false herald and false worship and a false church and a false command and a false penalty. We'll talk more about that later. Now you can imagine when they hear the music begin to play, the symphony of all these instruments, the cacophony of this music, they are all to, as the music is playing, as the symphony is playing, they are all to fall down and worship this image. We see the penalty in verse 6, and then in 7 we see that therefore the music plays and everybody falls down and worships. The moment that the symphony fires it up, everyone, it appears, with the exception of 3 who we'll learn about in a minute, fall down and worship. So these thousands of people who come from various places in the kingdom, and immediately they all fall down and worship. And so that's where we are. Now, in Sunday school, they ask, well, where's Daniel? He's not even mentioned. Well, we don't know for sure. We do know we left Daniel at the end of chapter 2. He was serving in the palace. He could still be there. He could be out on the king's business somewhere. We don't really know. But we do know that he's not there. We do know that his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are there. We do know everyone falls down, and here we go. Here's what it would have looked like, by the way. If you want to get sort of a snapshot of what it looked like, there's what it probably looked like. Everyone falling down, with the exception of 3 men. Verse 8, therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So we see that some Jews are accused of not obeying this command, in particular our 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, by the way, what's translated maliciously accused? So there in verse 8, it said the Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. It's actually a compound word in the Aramaic. It's the word that means to denounce or slander, and the word that means to chew up. And that's exactly what they were doing. They were attempting to slander them and chew them up. Really, they were wanting Nebuchadnezzar to chew them up. We see that they really had a problem with these Johnny-come-latelys that Nebuchadnezzar had appointed over the province of Babylon. If you remember in chapter 2, verse 49, after Daniel had interpreted the dream, Daniel made a request of the king. And the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So more than likely, he appointed them over the affairs of the city of Babylon. Daniel remains in the king's court. He's in the king's palace, and that's where we left the story. But no doubt, men didn't appreciate that these Chaldeans who had been with the king for a long time and been in the kingdom a long time truly hated it, and they laid charges against these young men. And we can see the real issue, and it sort of breaks down into how they lay this charge in sort of 3 steps with the king. These certain Jews, whom you've set over the affairs of the province, number 1, have not paid due regard or attention to you. So that's our first point. They don't pay attention to you, king. They don't even listen to you. Number 2, they do not serve your gods. That's the second charge. And number 3, they do not worship the golden image that you've set up. Here's the point. King, this is treason. They are untrustworthy. They are disloyal subjects of the crown who should suffer the penalty that you have decreed. This is treason. And that's where we find ourselves. Now again, we know that Nebuchadnezzar had found these 3 more valuable, 10 times more valuable in chapter 1 than any of those other wise men. We know in chapter 2 that he saw them as part of the dream interpretation, and he appointed them over the province of Babylon. What is he going to do? He's like in a catch-22. What will he do? Chapter 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, again we see some of Nebuchadnezzar's attributes coming out, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up?" Verse 15. Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I've made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Now again, in chapter 2, we saw qualities that we talked about with Nebuchadnezzar, but here 2 jump up again: insecurity and hostility and rage. He cannot believe that they're not obeying him, and he immediately overreacts, take off their head, kill them, burn them. It doesn't matter how good they are. We see him fly into a rage. Verse 14, we see he asks them directly, "Is this true, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up?" A direct question about worship. Now this is a direct question to men who've been submissive to Nebuchadnezzar. To men, as best we can tell, who've always served the best interests of the king and always were faithful to their God. And now the heat is really on. They are put in the crucible. Now, interestingly enough, verse 15, in spite of his rage, he gives them a chance to come in line, a chance to be obedient. He's like, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to fire up the symphony again, and if you just fall down and worship, hey, well and good, we'll count it even. It'll be like Serpro, like it never happened. Now, I want us to hear something. Nebuchadnezzar was not concerned they worshiped Yahweh. Not at all. He could care less. His concern was twofold. They didn't worship any of his gods. That was a problem. And they didn't obey the command to fall down and worship the idol that he had set up and commanded them to. Now, this is true for you and I. We can worship the Lord Jesus Christ, and as long as we partake of everything our lost friends partake of, as long as we do everything our lost friends do, as long as we run to everything our lost friends run to, as long as we bow to every false god that our lost friends bow to, they have no problem with us worshiping Jesus. They have no problem with us believing in God. But if, on the other hand, we say, "I'm sorry, I'm following the Lord Jesus Christ. I can't do that. I can't say that. I can't go there. I won't go there. I'm instead going to behave this way," then we will be placed in some form of a fiery furnace. I promise you. Stand by. But now, if we're willing to fall down and worship their false gods right along with them, then they're quite comfortable for us to worship Jesus just along with the list of gods. This is the kingdom of God being called to compromise. And this happens, it's overt here, but it happens in our lives all the time. in a very covert fashion. Now, let's be honest. These boys could have said, hey, we'll just bow real quick. It'll be over. It'll be like it never happened. We won't tell anybody. We'll pretend it didn't happen, and we can go on serving God. No. That's not the path they took. Now, I love verse 15, his question, and who is the God who can deliver you from my hand? This little fanatic, furious, self-proclaimed demigod could never imagine the answer that he is about to be presented with. Verse 16. So there it is. The gauntlet's been thrown down by Nebuchadnezzar. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. And they dropped the mic. Now, these are men who have served him faithfully, never pushed back, because they were never called to compromise. And now they're being called to compromise. And they go from being willing servants to bold lines who say, no, we will obey our God. We will not do that. I love how they say, we don't even have a need to answer you on this matter. That's code for, hey, this is such a stupid, easy question. We will always obey our God and never disobey him. And if that's the call, we're out. Now, again, you can see they're still submissive to him. They're still referring to him as king. But they're telling the king, our God is able to deliver us from this fiery furnace. Our God is able to deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he doesn't, verse 18, we're not going to do it. We're not going to fall down and serve your gods. We're not going to worship the image. These three teenagers or young men did all they could to avoid a confrontation, a good lesson for us. But when the confrontation overtakes these three humble servants of Yahweh, they are bold in their faith. They are bold as lions in their trust in God. They are men who trust God and believe God can deliver us. Whether he does or not, I don't know, but he surely can. This is a good lesson for us. It is not we serve a God who will always deliver us and who always meet our expectations and who will always dance to our demands. We worship a God who can, and whether or not he does, we will still worship him. This is not the modern faith of most I shouldn't say that. I won't say most, of some 21st century Christians. This is a faith like Job's faith. As he was talking to his wife, he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, Job 121. Or as he was talking to his friends, though he, Yahweh, slay me, I will hope in him. You see, this is a Job faith. This is saying he can deliver. Whether he does or not, that's his choice. But no matter what, I will serve him. And that's where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego land with King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar is filled with fury. The expression on his face changes towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He orders in his fury the furnace to be heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. He ordered some of his mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent, the furnace overheated. The flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. So let me lay out the design for you. It appears that this furnace has a top that's open, and then it has an opening at the bottom where you can see into the furnace. So we see the soldiers dropping Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace from the top, this piped area. They're catching fire up there. Meanwhile, Nebuchadnezzar and all of these lawyers and judges and magistrates and leaders are down in the lower area watching all this happen, waiting to see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego consumed super fast in this super heated fire. So it looks something like that, right? You have an area up here where the smoke, so the air is drawn into the furnace and out. The charcoal and whatever you're heating is here. So Nebuchadnezzar and his lawyers and judges and magistrates and all those people are out here. The soldiers in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are up here. They throw them into the furnace. So Nebuchadnezzar is filled with rage. His expression is changed. He orders the furnace heated super hot, 7 times more than it's usually heated. History tells us these brick kilns were typically heated to about 1,000 degrees. So they brought in other ways, other products that burned hotter maybe, other flammables to heat it up. But you can see again this irrational anger. 1,000 degrees, the furnace is going to destroy them just fine. But he's so angry, he's doing things irrational. And this results in some of his faithful army men, some of his soldiers getting burned up in this whole thing. Can you imagine what this circus looked like? Equally, verse 21, we can see that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are still in their festive garments that they were wearing when they came to this event, and they're just bound with their tunics, their hats, their other garments, and they're thrown into this thing. And then in verse 22, you see the men are actually these honorable soldiers. They're destroyed. Verse 23, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go down into the fire. Now imagine this spectacle. We don't know what it looked like, but there's probably people burning on the top, things superheated. These people are on the bottom. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go in, headlong into the furnace, and everybody's downstairs kind of watching this circus, if you will. And that brings us to verse 24. Then Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." So the king is astonished. He's alarmed. He's startled. He's apparently seated, maybe a little mini throne there. He rises up and he immediately speaks to counselors. Now, this is the first time this Aramaic word is used. It's probably like a palace counselor. And he asked this question, "Hey, didn't we cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered, "That's correct, king, that's true." Verse 25, then he speaks again, "I see 4 men. By the way, they're all unbound, and they're walking around in the fire, and they're not hurt. And the 4th one looks like a son of the gods." Now, we don't know what made him look different. We don't know if it was like a Shekinah glory shining everywhere. We don't know. But we do know something made him look different. It wasn't just a 4th man, but it was a 4th man with a different appearance, and one that this lost pagan king would say was like a son of the gods. Now, just a few things here. Gallons of ink have been spilt on answering the question, is this a Christophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, or is this an angel? Number 1, Rich's opinion, alarm opinion. This is a Christophany. This is a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. Truth in Advertising, though, the pagan king said it's like a son of the gods, and then later he'll call it an angel. So we could debate Christophany or angel, but I don't think it matters that much. Here's the point. God protected his servants in the fire. That's the point. God sent his angel, whether that angel was the Christ, the Messiah, the pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, or whether that was a literal angel, a ministering spirit, according to Hebrews, sent forth to minister, not that much of a difference. God did it to protect his servants. Now, most of us have a favorite verse, and I have to share with you my wife's favorite verse. It's actually Isaiah 43, 2-4. It's applicable here, but the point's applicable all the time. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flames scorch you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I gave Egypt for your ransom, Ethiopia and Seba in your place. Since you were precious in my sight, you've been honored, and I've loved you. Therefore I will give men for you and people for your life." Now we understand that we apply this spiritually. We understand that we can't just walk through a fire and not be burned. This is applied spiritually as we walk in this life, and nothing can touch us, nothing can scorch us, the waters can't overflow us. But what Isaiah is talking about literally happened with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Verse 26. Oh, and by the way, there's just, again, because I like pictures, there's something of what they saw. Again, it would have been extremely bright. It's very hot. Now, whoever did this, the fourth one needs to look different, but that's okay. We'll forgive them for that little miss, and we'll keep going. Verse 26. Now, picture this. The king's on his chair, little throne maybe. All his lawyers and judges and leaders are all there. Then Nebuchadnezzar, out of his seat, now comes near the door of the burning fiery furnace. You can imagine he's proceeding carefully. It's very hot. And he declares, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of these men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Now, as you look at this, this becomes almost comical. You can picture Nebuchadnezzar up there. Hey, come out of the fire, y'all. At this point, not only has Nebuchadnezzar seen the power of God, so has all these other men with them. And seeing the power of God has really squelched, extinguished his rage. But then look at verse 7 or 27. The satraps, the prefects, all of these leaders and judges and rulers, they're seeing nothing on them is burned except the ropes that bound them. Their clothes are not singed. Their hair is not singed. There's not even a smell of fire upon them. You can imagine the whispers of amazement and the words of these three men ringing in their ears. Our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from this burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand. You can imagine what was going through everyone's mind. And I would remind you, all of this is happening in Babylon. All of this is happening behind enemy lines. Yahweh is once again attempting to make himself known, that there's no God like him. There's no God who can deliver like him. Verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So notice Nebuchadnezzar, before we dive in, two things amazed him, really. Yahweh's power, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's faith. And I'll just say this in passing. You know what makes God absolutely lovely? Not great Sunday school lessons about him. Our simple childlike faith, especially in the crucible. When people see us trusting our God with a childlike faith, that makes our God lovely and beautiful and prized in the sight of lost people. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar saw. So you see Nebuchadnezzar's points. Blessed is the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This God sent his angel to deliver his servants who trusted in him. These men who trusted in God, they frustrated the king's word. The Aramaic there is they changed the king's word. They yielded up their bodies because they were not going to serve or worship anything except their own God. And then seeing God's awesome power and these young men's amazing faith, he makes the decree of tearing people from limb to limb, of converting their houses to dunghills if they say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It seems that tearing people from limb to limb and converting homes to dunghills is one of Nebuchadnezzar's go-to threats, and surely he goes to it here as he warns anyone in his kingdom who would speak against Yahweh. Now this is a pagan king acknowledging the amazing power of Yahweh God, but yet one whose heart remains far from that amazing God. People can say a lot of good stuff about Jesus and never, ever, ever close with him by faith. This king has said some amazing things, and he's out telling he's going to destroy anybody who doesn't worship this, who says anything bad about this God. But yet he is so far disconnected from this God. Now, as we close the lesson and we sort of make some application, I can't help but wonder if Nebuchadnezzar left that 100-foot idol, 90 to 103-foot idol, standing on the plain of Dura for the rest of his reign, or if he had it tore down. We don't know. The scriptures are silent. But here's what we do know. God's servants have been tested. God's power has been put on display for a pagan people. God is attempting to make himself known. So I do want to close with some thoughts and applications. There's so many. I think I have 7, and that was just because I didn't want to go this too long here. Yeah, I have 7. So we'll just kind of run through my 7 real quick. Just things to consider as you look at this text. Number 1, God stands with his people in their troubles. I quoted Isaiah 43, 2-4, my wife's favorite verse. This should be amazing, and it should bring great comfort. As we walk into our fiery trials, even if they're not as overt as this, we will find Jesus is already there waiting in the next furnace for us. Second, this event reminds us that there's a much greater king. A king that made a decree that all who do not follow his laws perfectly will suffer an eternity under his wrath. A place where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. This king was holy and just, and his laws were altogether righteous and right. This story reminds us that Jesus took our place in the fiery furnace. Jesus bore the wrath of the Father against us. In the case of the gospel, Jesus does not join us in the furnace. Rather, Jesus steps into the fiery furnace of God's wrath. And this story reminds us of what Jesus did to redeem us. Third, as our pastor highlighted in her sermon, this story reminds us there's a counterfeit gospel, and that counterfeit gospel has all the trimmings. There's a false god, Nebuchadnezzar. There's a false herald who's going to proclaim on the behalf of that false god. There's a false church who will participate in false worship. There's a false command, and with the false command, not only false worship, but a false penalty, and that's that they'll be burned in the fiery furnace. We need to ensure we do not have false gods, false heralds with false demands making greater demands on us than our God. We need to make sure that we are following and obeying God and worshiping Christ. Fourth, here on the plains of Dura, we see 3 types of faith: a credulous faith, a cowardly faith, and a courageous faith. First, the credulous faith. The willingness to believe anything is manifested in the hundreds, indeed thousands, who are willing to fall down and worship this golden statue with not so much as a word of objection. That's a credulous faith. They could care less. No, it doesn't matter to them. It's credulous. The second type of faith, not as obvious at first glance, but it's a cowardly faith. We can be certain that among the hundreds, indeed thousands, here on the plain of Dura that day, that there were other Jews who had been deported from Judah to Babylon, and who were there in the province in some form of leadership or law. They knew it was wrong to fall down and worship the idol that's forbidden by God, but they went along to go along. They fell down like the others because the others fell down. That is a cowardly faith. And then the third type of faith is that courageous faith. In the spite of potentially losing their life, in spite of the king's command, in spite of everyone else and what they did, they displayed a courageous faith in Yahweh God. And that would be my point as we think about this fourth point, that day by day we would display a courageous faith. Moving quickly, fifthly, God delivers his children not from the fire, but through the fire. There is no temptation taken you but such as common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above what you are able, but will with the temptation make a way to escape that you may be able to bear it. He doesn't say he will get you out from under the temptation. Rather, he will deliver you through the temptation. God doesn't promise to deliver us from the fire, but we do see he delivers us in the fire or through the fire. Number 6, again going quick, it's amazing. A person can see so much about the power of God and how great it is and how amazing God is, how amazing Jesus is, and step away and continue to worship an idol. In many ways orthodox, in all ways lost. And 7th, we see this story again on a much grander scale, a much larger scale. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all the causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into a fiery furnace. In that place there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And then generally we attempt to end these lessons with, okay, where's Jesus in this story? Well, again, if indeed it is a Christophany, and that's Rich's opinion, we find Jesus right there in our furnace with us. I present unto you Daniel chapter 3. Until we meet again next week, Daniel chapter 4. Man, here we go with Nebuchadnezzar again. So I think God's going to have something rich for us there as well. And I do think we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar finally turn to the true and living God. But until we meet again, either in Sunday school class or on YouTube, God bless you. I hope you have a good day.